A commercial fisherman says that he accidentally pulled hundreds of human teeth out of the ocean, and what happened after he brought them home made him throw everything back out into the sea. So this story was sent to me by a follower named James, and he's from the West Coast. And before I tell it, there's no way for me to verify whether any of this is true. So as always, take it as entertainment and you can decide for yourselves. Now, James says that this story happened to his uncle, who's a commercial fisherman, and he spent nearly 20 years working out on the water. And according to him, it was the only time that he ever thought about never going back out to the sea ever again after this encounter. So his uncle had been fishing the Pacific for a while, and he pulled up everything that you can possibly imagine. Old anchors, weapons, animal bones, even abandoned safes he's pulled out. But nothing, and I mean nothing, came close to what happened one foggy morning just before sunrise. Now, he had just dropped his trawl net about a mile offshore when it snagged onto something unusually heavy, or it was just giving him some fight. And at first, he thought maybe he hooked it onto like an engine block or maybe an old section of a wreckage. And it took nearly 20 minutes to drag whatever this was onto the deck. And instead of any of the obvious, up came this old burlap sack that was rolled out, it like rolled out of the net. And it was tied shut with what looked like rotted rope. Obviously, being curious, he cut it open, as many of us probably would have, and out poured hundreds, maybe even thousands of human teeth that just spilled across the deck. Not dentures, not animal teeth, I mean human teeth. Some still had fillings, other had gold crowns that were attached to them. Some looked decades old, and others looked disturbingly fresh, and he just stood there frozen. And his first thought was that someone had dumped evidence maybe from like an old dental office or, but then he noticed something pretty strange. Several of the teeth still had tiny pieces of jawbone attached to it. And that's when his stomach dropped and he immediately called the Coast Guard, thinking that he just possibly came across some evidence of like a cold case or hundreds of cold cases. And when they arrived, they photographed everything and they collected the teeth, obviously. But because the sack had clearly been underwater for years and there was no obvious indication of where it possibly could have come from, they told him that they'd follow up if necessary. Most likely they would be, to get a statement again later on. But because there was so many teeth that spilled across the deck, some actually slid into spots that were hidden, and James nor the Coast Guard had noticed them. Now, finding them after they had already been gone for quite some time, James decided to hold on to them in case they came back to speak with him, and he was going to give it to them then. Now, that decision would end up haunting him. He couldn't stop thinking about them. Something about the collection felt actually like sickening and wrong to him. And he dumped them into this 5-gallon bucket in his garage when he got home later on that day. And he tried to forget about them, tried to go on with the rest of his day and the rest of his night. Then the noises started. Every single night, just after 1 a.m., he'd hear what sounded like marbles slowly rolling across the concrete floor in his garage. And every time that he grabbed a flashlight and walked into the garage, there was nothing at all, except the bucket, and it somehow had tipped over, and the teeth were scattered across the floor, perfectly spread out, almost as if someone had carefully arranged them. And he blamed the rats or other animals, he blamed gravity, and then convinced himself that he never set the bucket upright in the first place. Until one night, his wife shook him awake, and she whispered to him that she thinks someone was outside. And he looked through the kitchen window, and standing at the end of the dock was a person, standing completely still, facing the water, not the house. They weren't moving, they were just standing there. And he grabbed a flashlight and ran outside, and there was nobody, there was no boat, there was no footprints, no sound, except for one thing. He found a trail of wet footprints leading from the shoreline straight into his garage. And the garage door was already open, and inside the bucket was empty. Every single tooth that he'd thrown in there was now gone. The next morning, he searched everywhere for them, thinking that maybe he moved them or his wife, but there was nothing. And later that afternoon, he loaded the empty burlap sack into his boat without really knowing why. He was kind of doing it like robotically almost, like a spell on him. He returned to the exact coordinates where he found them, and he tied a weight to the sack and dropped it overboard. And the moment that it disappeared beneath the surface, the water, he said, it was like so still. There was no wind, no waves, nothing. The silence lasted almost a full minute. And then something bumped the bottom of his boat. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. And it was slow and very deliberate. Like definitely wasn't an accident. Like someone was knocking from underneath. And he started the engine and never looked back. And according to James, his uncle sold that boat less than a month later, and he never fished that area again. And maybe some things do belong at the bottom of the ocean, and they're maybe never meant to be found. So what do you think? Would you have opened the sack or thrown it back the second that you realized that there was human teeth inside? Let me know what you guys think in the comments.